So this is my quarantine tank, 375 gallons, 5 feet by 5 feet by 2 feet deep. And it's been up and running now for a little over a month. So this video is going to be about some tips with quarantining your koi and also some things that I've learned. First advice I would have if you're setting up a quarantine tank is to read a bunch of websites and see what other people say about setting up tanks and kind of see what the consistencies are between different pages that you get advice from, and then you got to just do it. So most important thing about quarantining is you got to know what you're doing. So why would you quarantine your koi? You don't just throw a brand new koi in your pond, because if you do that, the fish that you just bought may have some kind of parasite or disease that can transfer to all your existing fish and end up infecting them and potentially killing them. Or your existing koi may have some kind of parasite that they're kind of adapted to or immune to that can infect and start to kill your new koi. So if you throw brand new koi in your pond, you're at risk of having that happen every time. So that's why you quarantine. So you want to make sure your new fish are healthy, and then you want to make sure that your new fish can handle your pond's water, and then you want to make sure that your koi are compatible with the new koi. So that's the process I'm in right now, and it's been basically not that fun and kind of stressful. So I bought 7 koi, and 2 of them died within the first week, and I was having really high ammonia levels, and one of the fish had obvious signs of ick, and they all appeared sick, and it was really hard to maintain good water quality, just because basically a quarantine tank is a heavily overstocked koi pond, and overstocked aquariums and ponds are very difficult to maintain, and they can get out of hand very quickly. And that's why I don't plan on getting tons of fish in my pond, and I never have gotten tons of fish from my pond, because I want to make it easy. And I think that it's more relaxing when you don't have to deal with all these problems of overstocking. So anyways, make sure, number one is make sure your tank is all set up and ready to go. You have all the right equipment before you buy the fish. I have a filter here, which is a BioSteps 10 filled with Metalla. I have a pump that I bought, a heater. There's air stones at the bottom that I turned off just so we could see the fish a little bit better. And I built this little cover out of just some PVC pipe and some really cheap plastic fencing from Home Depot. And it has a little hinge on here with zip ties, and it was super cheap and easy to make, and it does the job really well. You don't want anything getting into your pond. Predators would have a field day in there, and if you don't want your fish jumping out. So this cover, there's lots of different nets and different things you can buy or make, but this cover is mandatory if you have a quarantine tank. So you got to have everything set up the right way. Make sure you have a fail-safe design. So you can see the pump is not resting right on the bottom, if you can see that. The pump there is resting in a little basket with some cobblestones. It's probably like 6 inches off the bottom. And that way, in case the tube that connects to that pump that runs back to the filter, if it gets disconnected anywhere and starts spilling out onto the ground, you won't drain your entire pond. It will just drain down to 6 inches and your fish won't die. The other thing is avoid siphons. that's one thing that I didn't really think about until I saw it happening, and luckily I didn't contaminate my entire pond. But when you pump water out of your quarantine tank, so when you do a water change, see this tube here? I have this tube is what I connect to my pump in there when I want to take out water out of my quarantine tank. So I pump water out, and when you put the pump on and you put this on, when you turn the pump off, and if you walk away, there's a siphon in this tube that will continue to drain out, assuming that the end of the tube where it's draining is lower than the quarantine tank. So your tank will completely drain with that siphon if you don't disconnect it and take the tube out of the quarantine tank. So that's one thing that I saw happening that I was like, oh wow, I got to disconnect. The other thing is when you fill your pond, I'm filling my pond every couple of days. I was doing it every day at one point with water from my pond. So I have this other pump here that I drop in the pond, and I have this other tube that's connected up to the pond, and it comes in right over here, and you can see it's right at the top. There's a good like 3 inches of space between the tube and the water surface, and if I would have dropped this tube way down in the water, or may say it's 3 or 4 inches lower in here and doesn't just pour right on the top, as soon as I unplug the pump when it's inside the pond, it will create a siphon and suck the water back through this tube all the way back into the pond again. And then you're basically contaminating your koi pond with the quarantine tank water. And what's the whole point of even doing the quarantine if you do that? So avoid siphons is a pretty good clue. Pretty good tip. Avoid cross-contamination. That's pretty self-explanatory, although you have to kind of think about it sometimes. Like, this bucket is only for my quarantine tank. This table that I put out here is basically all for quarantine tank stuff. And you don't want to mix things that go in your pond and your quarantine tank. So you have to think about it a little bit, but just you don't want to mix the water together, otherwise you're defeating the purpose of having a quarantine tank. Be ready for disasters. I wasn't expecting all the fish to get sick right away, so I didn't even have any medication for parasites or for ick, so I had to go buy some, and that delayed things by a day or two, and maybe that was why some of my fish got sick so fast and died. I didn't treat it right away. There's a lot of sites that recommend salting your quarantine tank, and at certain amounts, and I started salting my tank. So here's the salt I have, but you can buy any salt that doesn't have any additives. You can get really cheap salt at the hardware store, but you can go up to, I went up to 0.4%, but it took a good amount of time to get it there because I didn't want to shock the fish. So I kind of incrementally, day by day, increased the salt concentration. I have a little salt meter here that you just dip in the water that tells you your salt. When you drain your pond, quarantine tank, if you have a lot of salt in your water, you don't want to drain it right into your plants because it's going to kill your plants. Have a log. So I write everything down, and I can read my writing, but I do water parameters. I actually check the ammonia twice a day ever since the 28th of the month. That's over a month now. Write down when you do water changes. I was mainly just recording when I do a water change, how much of a water change, what percentage of water change, how much additives I'm adding, what kind of additives I'm adding, if I'm feeding, salt levels, and stuff like that. But mainly I found that the ammonia, you got to check the ammonia often, and ammonia can get out of hand very quickly in a quarantine tank and cause the fish to get really sick and stressed. So so I use a couple different things. So I've always used this for my main pond, but the problem is when you read the labeling, it tells you you can add more, and you have to do a little calculation here, but if you want to do ammonia binding and nitrite binding, but it doesn't tell you how long the effects last, and how often you can do that. And I found that isn't described on any of these additives. Like this is a really good one, supposedly Chloram X. You can take away, you can bind ammonia and I think even nitrite, and it's also just a water conditioner, takes chlorine and chloramine out, but it doesn't say how often you should do it. And I've had to do it pretty much max dose almost every day because my ammonia is 0.25 always, no matter what I do, no matter how big of a water change I do, even though my pond is zero ammonia, zero nitrite, zero nitrate. So the new water that comes into the pond always has zero everything in it. But the quarantine tank always has some trace ammonia. And when it gets up to 0.5 or 1, I'm getting really nervous, and so I'm putting in the max dose of my Chloram X. Then test the water a little bit later. I might go down to 0.25 ppm of ammonia, but I never get it to 0. And so I'm always checking ammonia and adding the Chloram X, but I don't honestly know if I'm overdosing because I'm doing it at least every day where I'm putting in almost the max dose just to keep it down at 0.25 ppm ammonia. And that even goes for with my filter running for over a month now. It does take time for the ammonia nitrite cycle bacteria to really build up in numbers to have any kind of effect. So even if you have a filter, if it hasn't been up and running for a long time, it's not really doing anything for probably at least a month. So you got to be really on track with your water parameters so that you can do water changes with fresh new water from your pond, or keep adding chemicals like ammonia binder to keep the ammonia levels low, because otherwise your fish are going to get sick and some of them are going to die like mine did. So that's a good tip. You want to have excellent water quality, so have a plan ahead of time. Do all the calculations. You know, it gives you like ounces per gallon, and you figure all that stuff out ahead of time so you know how much you're going to be adding to your quarantine tank, even though, like I said, it doesn't really give you any information for if you should do this every day and if there's certain maxes that you don't want to go over, but at least know how much you're going to be adding so you're just randomly throwing stuff in your pond or in your quarantine tank. Netting fish, that's a big one. So the koi that I just bought have been in here for about a month, and I just netted one of my koi from the main pond and put it in there. It's the Shiro Utsuri, the black and white guy back there, and it took a long time to net him, and it was very stressful for the fish and for all 6 of us in my family to try to get him into a bowl or into a net. And there's lots of videos on the internet that show how easy it and non-stressful it looks, but trust me, it's very difficult, especially if you have a big pond, to net one of your koi. They're fast and you don't want to stress them or injure them in the process. And after doing that, I do not want to have to net any of my koi again. So I'm thinking either I'm never buying any more koi, or once I've had these quarantine tank fish in with my koi from the main pond and I realize that everybody's okay with each other, then I'll put in most of the new guys in the pond. And if I'm thinking if I want to buy any more koi for the rest of the time I have this pond, I'm going to get them in the next couple of weeks and put them in with Shiro Utsuri from my pond and see and have them live together for a few weeks and make sure they're all compatible, and then just never do it again, because it's really difficult to catch a fish. It's stressful. It's he didn't look too happy, and it's not a fun process. The whole quarantine thing is not easy. I mean, I don't know if I'm not doing it right, but it's not a simple, relaxing thing like having the main pond is. It's like you got to be on it. I'm checking the water, like I said, twice a day, and hoping that these guys all stay healthy and I can put them in the main pond soon. So those are my tips. Yeah, water test kit, that's big. I got an API test kit. I'm using it twice a day, and not cross-contaminating with my main pond either, so keeping everything separate. So anyways, there's the update, and I'll do another video when I'm putting the koi in the main pond.